Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We are your hosts, Jack Stern and Spencer Michaelis, coming to you every week from Brewer Fanatic, recapping all things Brewers. The Brewers coming back home this week after finishing off a long road trip, but all in all, a very successful week for the Brewers so far at the time we're recording this. They took 2 out of 3 from the Boston Red Sox to wrap up that road trip, and then they came home for perhaps the biggest series of the year so far, both in terms of the storylines that were involved and just the implications for the divisional standings and potentially the playoff picture down the road. They came back home, played Craig Counsell and the Cubs for 4 games in Milwaukee, and took 3 out of 4 in that series as well. So we got a lot to break down for you here, and we're going to dive right into it. But first, Spencer, how are you doing tonight? I didn't get a chance to put that in there.
I'm doing well. I mean, what you just covered is contributing to me doing well. Fun week for the Brewers. I got to attend a bunch of games this week, which I had not been able to do because of some of our coaching requirements we had going on at the moment. So yeah, I finally got to go to some games, and it was a very fun week of attending games for me.
Fun fact, Spencer was at the game on Thursday for the series finale against the Cubs. So I was covering that game. I'm sitting in the press box, and apparently Spencer was sitting like right below me in the loge level, like the section that's immediately like in front of the press box. And I didn't see you sitting there the entire game until you stood up at the end as soon as the game was over and you started waving at me. So I apologize for that.
Well, I didn't draw attention to myself, so it's not your fault. That's a first. Yeah, I'm a peacock walking around always trying to draw attention to myself. But I was letting you do your job, Jack. I apologize.
Yeah, exactly. That was my takeaway. Maybe it just means that I was really locked in up there and I was focused on the task at hand of covering that game. But it was a fun series to cover, but we'll get to that in a little bit. We got to start with this Red Sox series here to wrap up the road trip. The Brewers taking 2 out of 3 in that series. As we said, Jared Koenig got to fill a different role in this series in the first 2 games. Pat Murphy going with an opener against the Red Sox in the first 2 games of this series, in large part because the Red Sox best bats at the top of the lineup are primarily left-handed hitters, and he had a couple of righties lined up to start these first 2 games in Bryce Wilson and Colin Ray. So we'll dive into game 1 first. The Brewers winning that one 7-2. Koenig, like we said, starting as the opener, I should say. A little bit of a mixed bag the first time through. He gave up a couple base runners. He didn't get through the first inning, so Wilson ended up coming in pretty quickly. But he was able to get out of the inning and followed with a pretty solid outing in, I guess you would call it long relief, but he was still the bulk pitcher for this game. He went 5 1/3, scattered 6 hits, 2 runs allowed, only 1 walk against 7 strikeouts. So that was really nice to see for him. The K to walk ratio has by far been the biggest negative so far for Bryce Wilson since he's transitioned into that starting rotation. So good to see a step forward there. It wasn't as great in his second start of the week in review here. We'll get to that one later. But the real story of this game, so this was the Friday night broadcast on Apple TV Plus, and William Contreras ended up being the star of this one because he hit a moonshot 2-run home run over the Green Monster, and it ended up drilling someone's popcorn bucket in the stands there on top of the Green Monster where they have the seating in left field. And it was a fun moment both during the game and after. During the game, if anyone was watching, Tim Dillard was there because he was the color commentator for this road trip, and they weren't broadcasting that game on local TV, but, they're all still there hanging out, doing whatever. So he comes around like midway through the game as the Apple TV crew is catching up with the fans who were lucky enough to have had their popcorn bucket blown up by a line drive or rocket home run. So Tim Dillard was out there hanging out, kind of having fun with them. It was a fun moment. And then it got even better because at the end, they had the fans come down onto the field, and William Contreras ended up taking a picture with him, signing some stuff. Did he sign the popcorn bucket? I can't remember.
He signed the popcorn bucket, yeah.
Okay, he signed the popcorn. It was miraculously still in one piece, I believe, when they brought the bucket down.
Yeah.
Was there a hole in it?
There was a hole, but it worked.
I mean, if that's all that so like what was it, a hole on like one side of it, or did it go through?
I'm not sure. I just know they said it was broken and there was a hole somewhere, but
I was prepared to be really impressed with the durability of this popcorn bucket, but I guess it still held up pretty well, all things considered. But Christian Yelich and Willie Adames adding on with RBI doubles, and then Joey Ortiz hitting a sac fly later in this one for an insurance run. Brian Hudson did a really nice job out of the bullpen with 2 scoreless innings to protect that lead, and then Yoel Payamps getting the final 3. So a pretty nice, easy win for the Brewers in Game 1. Game 2, they took that one as well. Koenig once again coming in as the opener, and this time he really did just about exactly what you could ask for when you're going with an arrangement like this. This actually worked out perfectly for the Brewers. So pretty much how you draw it up if you're Pat Murphy. Koenig starting this one as the opener, coming in for the second straight day. He went an inning and a third, so got 4 outs in a row, no base runners, struck out 3 guys for 4 of those outs, and then Colin Ray came in afterward and did a nice job in technically relief, but as the bulk guy. 5 2/3 for him, 3 hits, 2 earned runs, 3 walks, 2 Ks. Koenig and Colin Ray actually carried a no-hitter through 6 innings in this game before Rafael Devers came up and hit a double, and then there was an RBI hit to drive in a couple runs there. But a really solid performance from, I'm going to say, the Brewers' run prevention unit, because, again, you look at Ray with just the 2 strikeouts. That means that the defense is doing some work for him as well. And in my mind, it's just important to think of that way, to include both of those units together, because that's how the Brewers are thinking about it as well. Jake Bauers, Gary Sanchez, and Sal Frelick all hit RBI singles in this one. Joey Ortiz once again doing some damage with a 2-run double. And then Bryce Terang hitting an insurance home run in the top of the 8th to extend that lead to 6-2. And Hobie Milner soaking up some innings out of the bullpen. He got 5 outs. And then Trevor McGill ended up having to come in at the end there to finish it out, because it did end up getting back to a 3-run game. But still, another nice victory for the Brewers. Just kind of circling back to the way that Pat Murphy deployed the pitching staff in this one. Spencer, did you have any thoughts about going with an opener there for those first 2 games?
I loved it. I thought it was a really good call. Whether it had worked like it did the first game, which it was, mixed bag, or if it had worked like it did the second game, which was pretty much exactly how you would lay it out, like you said, I thought it was the right call. That is, like you mentioned, a lineup that kind of stacks the top of the order with lefties, and the lefties at the top of the order are probably their best hitters in the lineup as well. So it just made a lot of sense. I think Tyler O'Neill was probably the one threat, especially in Game 1, that you were scared of with a lefty facing him. But either way, I liked it a lot. And not only that, it allows a guy like Wilson or Ray to see the top of the order only twice, even if they're seeing the rest of the order 3 times. And that's important too. They're going to see these guys eventually, but you just don't want them to get as many looks at a Ray or a Bryce Wilson as you may be willing to give them at a Freddie Peralta, for example. So I thought it was just a really smart call on his part. Something that I wouldn't be shocked if we see them do it once in a while, when there are just lineups that are, the Red Sox don't change the top of the order very often. They're pretty much going to go in there with their guys, and you can get away with putting in an opener. So there's probably going to be some other matchups, but the Red Sox kind of lined up perfectly just with somebody like Koenig, and like I said, a few of their best hitters being lefties at the top of the order. So really, really good idea, I thought, from Murph.
Yeah, I was thinking similarly. I think that when you look at the context of this series specifically, I don't think this is something that the Brewers need to be doing all the time, but I think this was the time to do it, because not only do you have that Red Sox lineup that really plays well into having a matchup like that where you can go to Koenig to start this game, but also the starters you had lined up for that series, Bryce Wilson and Colin Ray, have pretty dramatic reverse platoon splits based on their arsenals and the way that they use their pitches. Those sinkers are not going to be nearly as effective against lefties as they are against righties. They do have the cutters, but they have arsenals that profile better against right-handed batters, especially if Colin Ray is not super willing, or the Brewers are not super willing to have him throw more splitters. And that's something that we can kind of revisit too as we continue talking here in this episode. But it was just a good situation to switch things up a little bit and get a favorable matchup. Just get him in a position where, when you had an opportunity to weaken a lineup a little bit, so to speak, or keep some runs off the boards by shuffling the order, I think it made sense to do it, and it ended up working out pretty well, especially in Game 2 there. After that game, speaking of shuffling, we did see some roster moves for the Brewers. We'll kind of touch on these here after Game 2. because that's kind of when the move started. Thiago Vieira was traded to the Baltimore Orioles. Remember, he was designated for assignment a few days prior after kind of serving in that mop-up role, but then they since gave it to Mitch White, who they claimed off of waivers from the Giants. But Thiago was traded to the Baltimore Orioles in exchange for starting pitching, not prospect, but depth, upper minors depth, Garrett Stallings. Spencer, you kind of threw this in our notes here, just looking at the pitch mix for Stallings. The numbers for him are not good, really,
No.
at any level of the minor leagues. Granted, I took more of a preliminary glance at this because I was pretty busy that weekend as this was all going down. Believe it or not, I don't watch every single Brewer game. I only watch 90% of them. But the numbers for him are not great, but you kind of put some notes in here in our program guide, I guess, host guide. What do we call this? Or
Outline.
just
Just
agenda?
an outline.
Agenda, maybe.
Yeah.
But you threw this in here with some notes on the arsenal. He's got 6 pitches here. So it's sinker, cutter, changeup, slider, four seam, curveball. That's just in the order of the usage rate so far this year in AAA. And this really looks to me like a Colin Ray-esque arsenal, just kind of in the sense that it's kitchen sink. Nothing looks good. That slider looks like a sweeper. It's got over 10 inches of horizontal break. I don't know what he calls it, but that's a little bit more sweeperish than bullet slider. But it's interesting, and it just kind of makes you wonder, is there something here that the Brewers saw, especially because they did give up a lottery ticket pitching prospect who is, I believe he was pitching in, was it their Arizona complex or
Yep.
something like that?
Yep.
One of the lower levels, really young guy whose name I'm not going to attempt to pronounce for fear of butchering it. But this looks like someone who they at least see some potential for value here. So do you kind of want to walk us through what the Brewers gave up in this deal and then what they might be seeing from Garrett Stallings?
Yeah, sure. So Vieira, everyone, we've talked about him plenty. You know how we feel about Vieira if you've listened to any of the prior episodes, but it's a great velocity fastball with very poor characteristics and very little command of any of his pitches. So he ended up going to the Orioles in this. And then, yeah, I don't know how to pronounce the first name. I'm going to guess Inoris Rodriguez is the pronunciation. Not 100% sure on that. He's a 19-year-old who's in the Complex League. He had 15 strikeouts in 7 innings at the time of the trade. So while I don't know much about his stuff, I would imagine it's at least decent or interesting to the Orioles. But the fact that, like you mentioned, the Brewers were willing to give up a lottery ticket in this trade does make you wonder if it was somebody they were kind of targeting. Somebody like Stallings fits in a Colin Ray mold, like you said, sort of the current version of Bryce Wilson in some ways, where it's just you throw a lot of different pitches. None of them are great, but it's the kitchen sink approach where if one pitch is working great that day, you use it more. If one pitch isn't working, you've got 5 other pitches to use. So you can kind of mess around with the pitch usage from game to game. And it's a guy that he's been in AAA for at least a year. He's a guy who, if you needed somebody to come up and make a start in the majors, he's at that point in his development cycle. I think the Brewers usually have a plan in place. You wonder if they think they can tinker with some of the pitch shapes, if they might be able to pull out a little bit more velocity. He's got an interesting delivery too. It's a little funky, so that might help some of the stuff play up above the numbers as well. So it's interesting depth, like you said. I don't think it's too much more than that, but it does always catch your eye when the Brewers, they must have had him as a guy they were interested in beforehand, because I don't think they could have just traded Vieira for whatever the Orioles were offering, and instead they were willing to part with somebody who's performing well at the rookie level, and clearly it was somebody they thought they could at least get something out of, or they wouldn't have added onto the deal. So I don't know exactly what you're going to end up seeing from him, but I do think it's a name to keep an eye on because of what they were willing to give up in the deal.
So that was the first roster move that the Brewers made during this series. I think I said before they made it after game 2. I believe they actually made it before game 2, earlier that day with that trade for Vieira and Stallings. But they also made a more substantial roster move in the sense that it actually impacted who was on the 26 man at the time. Prior to game 3, they optioned Joey Weimer and recalled Oliver Dunn from AAA. This one was interesting to me because, and this is no slight on Oliver Dunn. I'm a big Oliver Dunn guy. Like, I really like the makeup of this guy. And I think that he has a future as a very productive MLB hitter or just player in general, because I think the profile is a lot more well-rounded than what people used to think of him when he was a prospect and what the numbers in the big leagues would indicate so far. But the future is bright for him, yet the future is the future. The future is not right now. I don't think he's in a spot where he's quite ready to be getting big league at bats, and Ortiz has jumped ahead of him on the third base depth chart, rightfully so. So I'm kind of wondering why is Oliver Dunn here? What upside not only is he providing to the Brewers right now, but also how is this good for Oliver Dunn's development right now, just to come up and most likely sit on the bench, and the only plate appearances he's probably going to get, like he ended up getting in the Cubs series coming up here, are pinch hit appearances where you're coming off the bench cold. I don't see how that's a good situation for him to be in. The Brewers, when they sent him down to Nashville a couple weeks ago, said that that's probably a better spot for him right now. He just needs at bats. And I would agree with that. He needs more time in AAA just to be out there and playing and maybe make some adjustments that he needs to make. I actually don't think he needs to make too many adjustments, but just seeing pitching, playing in a lower pressure environment and getting more comfortable in the box as opposed to just being up here and scuffling a little bit and sitting on the bench is the big part of it too. There's no spot for him in the starting lineup right now. I I just don't know why he's here. And I get needing to send Joey Weimer out because Joey Weimer also needs at bats too, but I don't really know how it helps both the current roster and Oliver Dunn for him to be the replacement.
Yeah, I'm with you. You mentioned to me before we started recording, but like, if you're just bringing this guy up to be the 26th man, why not somebody like Vinny Capra, who you're probably not going to ask for much out of him? He's there in case something bad happens. And that's kind of what Oliver Dunn is here for right now. He's here as the last case depth against a righty. Like, you've already got Monasterio who can play third. I don't think you want him playing third very often, but if you have to go to a sub, you can put Monasterio at third base, and that's fine. Owen Miller could technically go to third base right now if you need him to do that. I would like that even less than Monasterio, but either way, you can fill the hole of, like, even an emergency right now, you're okay. So I know they can put Bowers in the outfield, and Chris Roller had just gone back down, so I think that may be part of the reason they didn't decide to bring him back for Weimer, because it feels more like you might need an emergency outfielder than an infielder to me right now too. So on top of all the stuff you mentioned, it's just kind of a weird fit in general. So I don't know. Maybe he's planning on using him more as a pinch hitter than we're anticipating, but I don't really think that's a good idea. So I don't know. I don't really know what he's doing here either. It's a weird decision on whether it's Murphy or the front office. It's just a weird decision to bring him back right now.
We'll see what role he ends up filling and how long he's up here for in this stint. He ended up starting right away in game 3. I think this was more of just a Joey Ortiz has played a lot lately, and it was day game after a later game. Just get him the day off on the getaway day. Get Ollie Dunn in there against a right-handed pitcher as well. But I think it was mainly just a day of rest for Joey Ortiz more than anything else. Tobias Myers starting game 3, which the Brewers would go on to lose 1-2, a low-scoring affair. Myers, pretty solid work for him. 4 1/3, 6 hits, just the 1 earned run allowed, and he struck out 4 guys. He was getting more swing and miss on the fastball in this outing. Not as many cutters as we've seen from him in some other outings. It was a little bit more fastball heavy today. I actually asked him about that in the Brewers clubhouse when they got back to Milwaukee, and he just said it was kind of a combination of what the matchup looked like and also just seeing what was working for him that day. Four-seam fastball was working probably about as well as it has in any start so far.
Yeah.
So just roll with it. Don't feel the need to change things up too much or get too cute or anything like that. That lone run scored on a Rafael Devers sac fly. The efficiency was probably the one thing that maybe bit Myers a little bit, but it was also, again, I think just Pat Murphy not wanting to have him face that order a third time and run the risk of that game getting away from him, which I think is the right call there. I do think that for the large part, if you're in a position where reliever availability is good enough that you can get that starter out of there sooner, I think he should be doing it. I know there were a couple times early in the season, particularly that Joe Ross game in Pittsburgh, where we said you just got to leave him out there. But that was more in the context of the Brewers are playing all these games with no days off, and the bullpen was just way overtaxed at that point. but they're in a little bit more of a balanced situation right now. At least in this game they were. So then I think you're in a position where you can be a little bit more aggressive with that hook. Spencer, I see you nodding along. So unless you have any further comment on that, I'm going to keep it moving here.
Nope.
And now he's
Same
shaking
page.
his head. William Contreras plating the Brewers' lone run in this game with an RBI single in the fifth. And then Piamps again coming in to end that fifth inning after Myers got it started. How many guys? I don't remember how many guys were on. Was that a bases loaded?
I want to say it was first and third when he came in.
First and third. Yeah. But again, it was kind of what we talked about. It was a jam. You had third time through. Just make the call, go to the pen. Joel Piamps, who we talked about on last week's show as someone who is probably going to see his results settle down a little bit. And he had some nice outings during this week. So good to see from him. Enoli Paredes was, to me, the most exciting part of this game in a game where not a whole lot happened. He made his Brewers debut. He was recalled from AAA Nashville, well, contract selected from AAA Nashville. He wasn't on the 40-man yet, but he looked very electric in his first outing as a Brewer. 2 perfect innings for him, 4 strikeouts for Enoli Paredes, getting a ton of whiffs on that cutting four-seamer and the slider. I actually talked to him about that because I was curious looking at the pitch shape. I asked him, do you consider that like a four-seamer that cuts, or is it actually a cutter? He said he just treats it like a four-seamer. He knows that the cutting action is there, but he just really just tries to grip it like a four-seamer and let it rip and let the movement do what it does naturally. But he's someone who I think could pretty quickly ascend into an important role in this bullpen. He's got some interesting stuff, and the strikeout figures when he was in Nashville were ridiculous. I'm sure Spencer was following that even more closely than I was. Did you watch him pitch in Nashville at all?
Oh, yeah. A couple times. And yeah, when he was down there, his four seam and his slider both had 40+% whiff rates on them. So he was getting, I mean, they're both good pitches. And yeah, he was electric down there. Nobody was touching him down there. I had been hoping we'd see him for a little while now because it felt like he was absolutely the best pitcher in AAA. And you were watching guys like Vieira and White not really perform at the lower end of the bullpen totem pole. So I was very excited to see him, and yeah, it went about as well as you could hope in the first appearance.
So I know we just said that Paredes was the most exciting part of this game, and I still believe that. But for some other folks, it may have been the 4th instance of the benches clearing for Pat Murphy's squad this season, which it feels like we've already tied the total under the previous manager over however many years he was here, 8 or 9. But in this situation, what happened was Chris Martin was pitching in the late innings for the Red Sox, and the Brewers had an inning against him where they had a few guys square around a bunt, and Chris Martin did not like that. He exchanged some words with Quentin Berry at first base after the last out was recorded, and Quentin Berry did not like what he said, and that was really interesting to see because Q is usually like the coolest, chillest guy in the world. So to see him get fired up and really take offense to something like that kind of made you wonder, what was said. But it really just sounds like Martin did not take kindly to the Brewers bunting on him, kind of the mindset of feeling like they weren't giving him the respect of taking a full swing, I guess, or trying to hit the ball. I think it's dumb, but again, I've never been in that situation, so I'm just trying to kind of go through what was running through his mind in that situation. But Spencer, what was your takeaway from that whole dust up?
My takeaway is that a lot of pitchers are stupid. There's very weird
words.
Yeah, there are very weird unwritten rules that some pitchers believe in, and I remember earlier this year Lance Lynn was very upset that somebody bunted against him. I don't get it. I don't understand why it's part of the game, and I don't like bunting. But it's part of the game. And Perkins did it for a hit, and then Terrain kind of quasi did it for a hit, I think, but it ended up being a sack bunt. I think he was trying to push it past him. But Chris Martin is 37, 38 years old. Like, you're an older guy on the mound, and you're probably not moving super well. You can't be upset that somebody's trying to take advantage of that. In fact, in some ways, I would take that as a compliment that they don't feel comfortable hitting you, but they're trying to beat you in a different way. I don't know. It's always weird to me. I'm not a big fan of unwritten rules in any form for baseball, and pitchers, especially when they complain about stuff, is just always very annoying to me. It's like, just get them out. If you just get them out, it doesn't matter. And they did. he got an out on one of these, which is what I really don't understand. One ended up being an out, and then he got the next two hitters out, and he was covering first on that third out, which is how he ended up by Barry. And I will say, I don't think he was intending to yell like at Barry. I think he was just yelling, and it was in the direction of Barry. But you could see on the broadcast, even on one of the replays, that it was something about effing bunting. Like, it was something about that. And clearly you could see it was right in the face of Barry, even though I really don't think he meant it to be. And yeah, seeing Barry react like that was pretty shocking, because he really does not get involved in anything very often. Pretty laid back dude by all accounts. Even going back to his days as a player, he was kind of known for that and being a really good clubhouse guy, because he was so chill and just everyone liked him. So he must have said something that actually bothered Barry in that moment, but it was a classic baseball fight after that. Everyone ran out. The two people who were kind of upset got pushed away from the pile, and boom,
And
nobody's doing anything.
happened.
They're all just talking. So
Yep.
much ado about nothing in the end, as usual with baseball fights. Unless Abner Uribe is involved, then you might get a swing.
Attempted swing.
Yes.
That's what we'll call it. The Red Sox taking the lead against Elvis Peguero, who gave up 3 hits in the 8th. That broke the tie, and that was where the score would end up, as Kenley Jansen retired the Brewers in order. And in a fitting twist of fate, or not a twist of fate, but just a fitting end, Blake Perkins bunted for the final out. Moving on, the Brewers coming back home, and this was really the main storyline of the week. Craig Counsell's first return to American Family Field since departing across the border to manage the Chicago Cubs on a record-setting salary for a manager. The Brewers taking 3 out of 4 in this series. Before the baseball even started, though, we'll try to keep this brief because it's been covered endlessly by plenty of other outlets, and I'm sure everyone who was watching the game knew what was going on with all of this. But Craig Counsell getting a very vocal reception from the Brewers fans pretty much every time he either set foot on the field or his name was announced during pregame lineup introductions, whatever it may be. What I was actually really impressed about was there were a few times when the Chicago Cubs pitching coach came out and no one really seemed to confuse him for Counsell. Like they withheld the boos while he was out there for mound visits, and then they brought him back as soon as Craig came out to make a pitching change. So I guess I at least respect the discretion or like the ability to make that distinguishment. But definitely an interesting storyline there. Craig, for his part, just said that he kind of had a laugh about it, which I know people responded to that with the meme of, you know, the guy who's got like the smiley face mask on, but he's crying on the inside. I don't know, man. Like what is he supposed to say? That's kind of what my response was. Like, I understand why people are upset, and it was definitely a very controversial way the whole thing went down. And I'm still gonna say what I've said before. I do think that the way it all happened, like he looks like the villain coming out of that, and I don't think that that's an especially controversial stance to take. But the people who are like every little thing Craig has said since this has happened, like trying to nitpick it and find a way to criticize it, like especially just something like that. Like I really don't know how else he's supposed to respond at this point other than just kind of laughing about it. Like it is what it is at this point. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the way that this is all unfolded beyond what's already been said.
I mean, shout out to the, because I did think they did a really good job of not only what you talked about, which it is a difficult thing to distinguish between their pitching coach and Counsell a little bit. They're pretty similar builds. It's not like Derek Johnson walking out of the bull or the dugout versus Counsell, where you can clearly tell it's two different people right away. So I was impressed that nobody was booing the pitching coach as well. But along the lines of, like, I understand all the nitpicking and stuff because it's fun to go back and now kind of make fun of him for things not going well when it happens against the Brewers. But I do find it funny in some cases that people have been confirming their priors that he's a bad manager or something. He's a good manager. That's why it sucked to lose him. But that doesn't mean the Brewers were going to fall into a pit of despair like some people thought as well. They have clearly shown, and Pat Murphy's been part of that as well. So it was a fun week for me. I thought Counsell handled it pretty well, about as well as you possibly can. Even before game one, saying clap, boo, just enjoy the game. Like, yeah, it sounds kind of corny, but again, what else is he supposed to say? Like, please don't boo me. I don't want to get booed. I did a lot for the, like, no one's going to say that. he's going to say something that doesn't really push any buttons either direction and just say it's fine. And yeah, I'm sure he didn't love the reception because it probably hurt a little bit on the inside when you've been here for as long as he was, but I don't know how he could have lived through the last 6 months since he made this decision and thought that he was going to get anything else. So I'm sure he was pretty well prepared for what was going to happen. And yeah, fan base did a good job. I also didn't really hear of anything going too far or crossing any lines, which was good to hear as well. So, or good to not hear, I guess, in a way. So yeah, it was entertaining like I expected it to be, but I don't think it was anything too huge, really.
It was definitely an exciting atmosphere at the ballpark in game one of this series, which the Brewers won 5-1. We had a pitching duel between a pair of young left-handers. I guess Justin Steele's not super young anymore. He's been around for a few years, but still one of the better left-handed starters in baseball. He actually doesn't get enough credit for how good he's been the past couple of years for Chicago. So I know this is a Brewers pod, but we'll give him some credit there too. He's been very, very good the last couple of years, and he was very, very good against the Brewers in this game. He went 7 scoreless innings, allowing just 3 hits with 8 strikeouts and a walk. Very similar line for Robert Gasser, who went 6 scoreless, 3 hits, 7 Ks, 0 walks. And Spencer, one of the notes that I see you wrote down in here is what changed to start generating a little bit more swing and miss. I honestly thought in this outing it was really just that the Cubs couldn't pick up their release point. I kind of looked through some of the numbers on this, and nobody does well against a release point as low as Gasser's because it's so deceptive. But the Cubs do have one of the higher swing and miss rates out of any team on pitches like that. And he also got a couple whiffs on some fastballs up. But this does kind of tie into something that I wrote about this week about Gasser. I don't think anyone else has really pointed this out, but the way he's pitched since he's gotten to the big leagues, the way that he's used his pitches and mixed his pitches in the spots that he's been trying to hit, it's completely different than what he did in the minor leagues. Like, he's still throwing the same pitches. Like, his arsenal in and of itself hasn't changed. He's still throwing the same 5 pitches. But in the minor leagues, the MO for him was high fastball to get the swing and miss and then sweeper to get more swing and miss. It was basically all built around swing and miss. And that was really what his greatest strength was in the minor leagues. He had one of the highest strikeout totals in AAA last year.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I think did he have the highest strikeout total because of the
and strikeout rate?
Yeah, strikeout rate was up there as well. But this was a guy who was like striking out roughly, if not 30%, like close to it almost every year in the minor leagues. And now he's up here, and heading into this start, he had it was like a 3% strikeout rate. Like, he was not striking out anybody. And you could tell it was by design too, because of the way he was pitching. The Brewers, since he got to the big leagues, like completely overhauled the way that he was mixing things. And I'm sure if you asked him, he would kind of downplay it a little bit, like, I'm just, doing my thing, go out, attack, throw strikes, yada, yada, yada. That's kind of what they all say. That's your generic, post-game response. But the way that he's using all of his pitches is way different. We have not seen a lot of the cutter, which was basically his co-fastball in the minor leagues. He was using the four-seamer and the cutter at basically an even rate in Nashville in 2023. And we didn't see a whole lot of the two-seamer for him. But now, since he's been in the big leagues, it's been, first of all, he's throwing a lot more sweepers than he did in the minor leagues, which that's a positive development. Like, if he wants more swing and miss, he should be doing that. I like that they're doing that. I think he should be almost like a 40% sweeper guy just because it's such a good pitch from that slot and the angle that he's releasing the ball at. But as far as the fastballs go, it's been basically even usage of the four-seamer and the two-seamer now. The Brewers love their two-seamers and their sinkers. So they've had him doing that. And it's been both of those fastballs. He's been throwing the vast majority of them inside to righties. So in his case, to the glove side corner of the plate. And it's been working for him because he's getting a ton of weak contact. Like, all of the quality of contact metrics for him are off the charts right now. He's allowed 1 barreled ball so far. And that's basically been the only time anyone's really ever squared up a ball against him. He's had a couple more hard hits, but I don't know if he can count those as barrels because it's also just been, a lot of soft fly balls or ground balls, whatever. But the strikeouts just had not been there. And we saw it a little bit more against the Cubs. But sooner or later, there's going to need to be a shift where he kind of finds a middle ground between these two approaches because they are very different. And I'm okay with him doing this so far because I think it's based on the Brewers' needs right now as a staff. They just need guys to eat innings and be as efficient as possible. And if Gasser is getting a lot of weak contact outs early in counts, we've seen it. He's gone, I believe has it been like 5+ in 3 out of 4 starts, or has it been 6+ in 3 out of 4 starts? I think it's been 6.
I think it's 6, yeah.
I should remember this because I put it in the article, but that, shows you how good my memory is. But it's been, I believe, 6 innings or more in 3 out of 4 starts. In that last start, he worked into the 7th. He didn't get any outs in the 7th. He hit a hit and got pulled. So in that sense, it has been working. And I asked Pat Murphy if that was kind of the rationale behind what they have him doing. And he kind of hinted, yeah, that's a big part of it. He was like, he's getting outs early in counts right now, and they're seeing that this is working. Why would we change it? He said, why would we want him to throw more pitches if he doesn't have to? So to me, that kind of said, yeah, this is what's going on here. So I understand why they're doing it now, and I'm okay with it, and it's largely worked so far. But we've also seen the downside of it in that start against the Marlins when he gave up 10 hits, 9 of them were singles, 5 runs, 4 earned. They didn't hit him hard in that start either. They didn't hit him any better than anyone has in some of his other starts where he shut guys down, but that's just a product of when you're that reliant on balls in play. Like at some point, the sequencing just is not going to go your way, and the odds are not in your favor of somehow ending up with, on the whole, strong results on the year. Like unless you're, Blaine Boyer, who had that one year with Milwaukee where he ran like a 3K per 9. That's what it was. It was 3. I think it was 3 Ks per 9 for Gasser, not a 3% strikeout rate. I should correct that. Because that would be obscenely low. That would mean he struck like one guy out through his first 4 starts. But yeah, just at some point, it's not going to consistently work. So I think you do need to find a little bit more of that middle ground. Interesting side note, Murph actually told us when I asked that question that Gasser was actually frustrated that he wasn't getting any strikeouts in that outing. And, his response to him was just like, you can't be thinking like that. What he said, he was like, if I had a taser in that moment, I would have tased him. That's kind of become his running bit a little bit, talking about.
I was going to say, he's been threatening to tase a lot of his
He
players.
has been, yeah. He threatened to tase Joey Ortiz as well for chasing pitches out of the strike zone, facetiously, of course. But I understand, like, you don't want guys to be thinking strikeout all the time. Really, the focus always just needs to be on executing each pitch to pitch, and then just getting good results. That's the ultimate goal there. But I think at some point they are going to have to find a middle ground with the pitch mix and work in more cutters again, more high 4-seamers. The thing with the cutter for me, and I think we talked about this on last week's episode too, correct me if we didn't, but I firmly believe that cutter is also key to getting swings and misses on the 4-seamer.
Agreed.
Just because guys are seeing different kinds of movement from a very similar spin axis to the point that the naked eye probably can't pick it up, and the 0.2 of a second you have to react to a pitch. So just having those two pitches working together, where once you see some cutters where it looks like it could be a 4-seamer, but the ball is not carrying as much through the zone. So then when you do get the 4-seamer, then you are under it and you're swinging and missing more. I think he's going to have to go back to a little bit of that. And what I'm hoping now is, I do think that this ability to get the weak contact by busting guys inside is real. And that's a new skill that he's really picked up now since he's come up here. But now it's going to have to be just more of a balance. Like if you can get to the point where you sacrifice a little bit of the weak contact to add more of the strikeouts, and now you're kind of sitting at a point where he's solid at both, that's a really reliable middle to back of the rotation arm. And I think that's what Brewers and Gasser are both going to need long term. Do you have any more thoughts on that?
No, I guess the one thing I would add is that it feels like, I haven't pulled up any numbers on this, but there's been a decent amount of like 0-2, 1-2 counts where he's ended up having balls put in play. And like you said, it's still not hard contact, but those are the counts where if you're getting into those counts, now you do want to go after a strikeout, because that's the way you guarantee you getting out, short of obviously drop third strike or whatever. But a ball in play in that spot, even if it's soft contact, gives them a chance to get out. If you can go after guys when you have them in good pitchers counts and get swing and miss, that's the best mix you can find is you get early bad contact. And then if you do get them into a good count, then you can put them away. That kind of felt like how this Cubs game went a little bit more to me. Like he ended up getting early contact that wasn't great. But when he did have chances to actually get somebody and put him away, he was able to do that a little bit more. So, like you said, it may have just been a product of the lineup and everything else and how he fits as a pitcher. But if he can find that type of approach consistently and get those results, obviously you're not asking for 6 shutout innings every time he goes out, but that type of process for him feels like the best combination of everything for him. So I'm hoping we see more of that moving forward.
So for as little offense as we had early in this game with the pitching duel between the starters, the Brewers got to the Cubs bullpen, which has really been the theme for them so far this year in a lot of the wins that they have had over the Cubs, getting to the bullpen. That's by far the biggest weakness for the Chicago team right now. And this time it was Mark Leiter Jr. who was the victim in the 8th for Chicago. Sal Frelick hitting a single, Terang reaching base with a walk, and then Contreras smoked a hard grounder to third that skipped off the glove of Nick Madrigal, and that ended up really kind of kicking off the beginning of the end for the Cubs in this one. And really, things just kind of continued escalating from there. Willie Adames hitting a 3-run home run off Hayden Wisniewski, who replaced Leiter. This was an interesting sequence, too, because Adames had the green light to swing 3-0, and I believe the pitch he got, was it a slider or a fastball? But it was at, like, the bottom of the zone. Like, it wasn't a clear meatball, but he still put a good swing on it 3-0. So props to him.
Yeah, that pitch, I think, would have technically clipped the zone, but there's a pretty good chance it would have been called ball 4, I think, if he would have taken it. So, yeah, like you said, good for him.
Jackson Chourio adding an RBI double as well towards the end of this one. And then Hobie Milner coming in, ending this one for the Brewers. So a successful game 1. Game 2 was a rough one. The Brewers falling 6-3 in 10 innings. Started very, very similarly to game 1. Freddie Peralta was outstanding in this one, I thought. I know that a couple episodes ago we kind of criticized him a little bit for some inconsistency, but this was the good version of Freddie that we saw in this game. Really just blowing guys away with fastballs. This felt like a throwback to early career Freddie, where he was getting by throwing like 80% four-seamers. And credit to Peralta and William Contreras, they realized pretty quickly that this is what was working. I think they really realized it after Michael Busch homered on a first pitch curveball for the only run that Peralta allowed. That pitch call kind of ticked me off a little bit because you're getting just absolutely ridiculous swings against fastballs right from the get-go, and then you start with a get-me-over curveball. But I think looking at Busch's splits, he's also done pretty well against fastballs and struggled against breaking balls. So I can see what the vision was there. But I think there's also a case to be made for just keep going after guys. Like, you are not getting comfortable swings from anybody right now. And after that, they pretty much did make that adjustment. Freddie ended up throwing like 70% fastballs in this start, which is probably, off the top of my head, I'm going to assume it's the highest usage rate that he's had on his fastball in quite a while this season for sure. And yeah, just a really good outing for him. Unfortunately, the high strikeouts and a lot of deep counts meant that he was only able to get 2 outs through the 6 innings, so 5 2/3 for him. Jared Koenig coming in once again. We'll to mention him again on this week's episode. Bases loaded, coming in and striking out Ian Happ. Really nice work by Jared Koenig, who is suddenly looking like a legitimate dude in this bullpen. Like, I didn't really know what to make of him the first few outings because it was still very much he's put up some zeros, but this is very much just kind of like a guy who's not a bad pitcher, but he's just kind of a guy. Like, there's nothing about the stuff that's really jumping out to you right off the bat. The cutter's okay, but nothing that's, catching your eye. And it's kind of like, okay, he'll ride the shuttle this year and, maybe he can give you like the low 4s ERA and kind of that lower leverage, eat some innings role in the bullpen. But now the sample's starting to build up a little bit more. He's closing in on 30 innings. And I feel like that's the point where you can kind of say, okay, there's some actual trends going on with this guy. He's also throwing harder now. Like in that final opener outing against the Red Sox, and then in this outing, he was touching 98 miles an hour. He was averaging almost 96 with the 2-seamer. Like, there might be some legit stuff there, and the breaking ball is looking pretty sharp too now. Like, he's starting to pick up strikeouts as well. That was the big thing early on. Like, he couldn't get a swing and miss to save his life, but now he's actually getting like some really uncomfortable looking swings And I'm kind of starting to jump on the Jared Koenig train a little bit. Like this might be a dude now.
Yeah, I would consider myself a Jared Koenig believer at this point. I'm pretty well in on the bandwagon for him. I mean, the sinker just gets a ton of ground balls, softly hit ground balls. He doesn't get not unlike every sinker, pretty much. He doesn't get much swing and miss with that pitch, but the cutter is up to a 29% whiff rate. The curve's at a 46%.
Oh, is it actually? I hadn't seen that.
Yeah. He's up to
Okay.
46 on the curve. He's barely thrown the changeup. He's only thrown 6, but yeah, he's getting swing and miss on the other pitches. And then the sinker, it's kind of like the Gasser thing where he's getting a lot of bad early contact with the sinker, and he's been able to put guys away with the other pitches. And yeah, I'm pretty well bought in, especially if he does continue to get more whiffs and more Ks, because the quality of contact against him has been pretty terrible. Like, he's getting a lot of soft contact. Yeah, I mean, you could point to, he was the one pitching for the Dansby fly out to the wall in the other game. Yeah, so that's like the one piece hard contact I can think of lately, though. So it's been really, really good. Yeah, I'm pretty in.
Speaking of guys who also pitched well in this game, Ben Brown for the Cubs threw 7 no-hit innings within strikeouts. Craig Counsell taking him out after that as the pitch count was starting to climb. And again, everyone will make fun of him for that decision, but that's a pretty standard Craig Counsell move, and I was fine with it when he was doing it here. I'm still of the opinion that it's a fine move when he's doing it in Chicago. Even for as bad as that bullpen's been, he had his 2 only good relievers essentially from this season lined up to take over from there. So I thought it was fine. Hayden Wesneski coming in, Sal Frelick very quickly breaking up the no-hitter. I believe Wesneski got like 1 out and then Frelick singled right away. So it didn't last very long after that. And Christian Yelich then coming in later against Hector Neris in the 9th. The Brewers were down by 1. It was 1-0. Freddie Peralta was staring down potentially a second straight start where his team lost 1-0 because that also happened in Miami. But Yelich drawing a walk against Hector Neris in the 9th, advancing on what was called a balk, and then Willy Adames shooting one down the left field line for a single. Unfortunately, the good times would stop pretty much immediately after that. Trevor McGill came in for the 10th, immediately took what was a very scary looking line drive off of what initially appeared to be his pitching elbow. And at that point, if you're thinking it hit the elbow flush, your first thought is, well, his arm just got fractured into a million pieces. But the Brewers dodging a major bullet there. McGill went for x-rays right away as soon as he came out of the game. X-rays came back negative, and then we talked to him the next day, and he said, it actually got me more on the forearm than it did on the elbow. So he avoided a direct blow there. He's just dealing with a big bruise and some swelling right now. He actually went out and was still playing catch and tossing a little bit the day after just to try to keep everything loose. So right now, he's thinking he'll miss a couple days, but is hoping to avoid the IL. Pat Murphy said they'll kind of see where he's at a couple days, and then they'll make the call on whether he needs to miss a little bit more time or if he's ready to get back into games again right away. So the Brewers were down a reliever for the rest of this series, but all in all, the fact that McGill ended up being okay is a win, just considering what the alternative was. So Hobie Milner then having to come in cold, just did not have it, which again, you're coming in cold. That's not an easy situation to pitch in. Hobie's also just been used a lot. And I think I'm kind of at a point where I don't care that he's used a lot because his arm is just made of rubber. Like, he's probably the one guy who you don't really need to worry a whole lot about workload. But still, coming into the game cold, that's a tall task. And not only did he allow Trevor McGill's base runner, I should take a step back as well. The line drive that hit McGill, the runner scored from second on that because McGill was just in too much pain to even really think about fielding the ball there. So run scored there, and then another run scored once Milner came in, and then he would give up 3 more of his own. So Chicago ending up with 6 runs by the end of that inning, and Milwaukee falling in game 2. Game 3, the Brewers bouncing back with 10 runs, really snapping that streak of not being able to do anything against Chicago starters. This was the first game in which they scored a run against the Cubs starting pitcher this year, and because baseball's weird, they did it against Shota Imanaga, who entered the game with a .84 ERA. He had allowed 7 runs the entirety of the season. He gave up 7 runs to the Brewers in this game. So, baseball will baseball. Joey Ortiz getting his first career start in the leadoff spot against the lefty Imanaga in this game. He hit a leadoff double. And then Christian Yelich got a first pitch fastball right down the middle from Shota Imanaga and deposited it 441 feet into right field. That was a no-doubter, so that was fun to watch. And then the Brewers breaking out with some more runs in the third inning. Joey Ortiz hitting a single, Yelich hitting a single, Adames hitting a single, and then Gary Sanchez with a 2-run double. The real story of this game, though, was Blake Perkins, who was fantastic on both sides of the ball. He had a double in his first at-bat, and then in the third inning, he robbed a 2-run home run. And then a couple minutes later, he hit a 2-run home run. When asked which of those was more exciting, it was challenging for him to pick. Just a very good game for him, but he wasn't done yet because then Dansby Swanson almost hit a go-ahead grand slam in the fifth. The Brewers got a little sloppy defensively there in that game behind Bryce Wilson, who did not pitch great, but again, didn't really have his defense behind him in that final inning. Jake Bauers was charged initially with 2 errors in that inning. They overturned it and just gave him 1, which I think was probably the right call. The first play, he covered some ground and made a sliding stab to knock a ball down, basically, and then kind of bobbled on a transfer, but I'm not going to call it an error. But he then booted a routine ground ball that Jared Koenig got. Koenig was about to pull another escape act out of a jam coming in relief of Wilson, but just not able to make the play there. What can you say? Bauers, though, has largely been very solid defensively for Milwaukee, so just a rough night for him at first base. But Dansby Swanson coming up with the bases loaded, almost hit a grand slam to turn that inning into a complete and total implosion, but Blake Perkins making a crashing catch into the wall in right center. And then he would come up big once again in the 7th inning with Enoli Paredes on the mound trying to protect a 3-run lead. A hard hit sinking line drive into left center field. This was the catch that Perkins said was the toughest one for him of the night, and that's not shocking at all. You're talking about a sinking line drive. Those are way harder to read than a fly ball that you at least have some time to go back on and kind of feel out where you're at and then make the leap to rob the home run. This was a sinking line drive, and Blake Perkins covering a lot of ground and then making an over-the-shoulder kind of diving catch. It wasn't like a full dive, but he did have to extend a little bit to make the catch. Either way, just a spectacular play. So that really helped Enoli Paredes out in the 7th there. So just kind of going back to the pitching now, Bryce Wilson, like we talked about, was not great. When you're gifted a 7-1 lead, you got to give him more than 4 innings. You gotta. Like that's kind of the anti-Colin Ray thing in a way. Just
Right.
in the sense that Ray is always going to find a way to pitch with a lead and get you some innings. Bryce Wilson didn't really do that in this outing. Just a lot of traffic for him again. Once that error on Bauers was overturned, it ended up being 3 earned runs for him, which is probably closer to reflective of how well he pitched or how shaky he was, I guess I should say, compared to the 2 he was initially charged with. But I think it would be nice to get Bryce Wilson back into the bullpen. He's given the Brewers some nice starts, but it just seems like the command and the execution and all this is not consistently there for him when he's in these longer stints. And I think it also puts him in a spot too where he has to burn through pitch types quicker if something's not working for him, because I just haven't seen a whole lot of outings where all 5 pitches have been on for him. And granted, there's not going to be a lot of guys who have all of their pitches on every time out. But just in his case, it's a better fit for him in relief. I think he's largely done what the Brewers have asked for out of him, but I think it's not an ideal situation at this point. So his outing in this game, 4 innings, 6 hits, 4 runs, 3 earned, a couple walks again for him, and those walks are back to back in, I believe it was the 3rd inning. Don't quote me on that. So again, like lapses where the control was not there, just different things like that. But he gave him 4. I think that you would have hoped for more in that spot, but the Brewers ended up winning this one, obviously, so can't complain. Koenig, Paredes, and Mitch White doing a nice job recording the final 15 outs. And the only run that was scored after that, at least earned run, came against Mitch White. Like we talked about, really just that tough day for Jake Bauers in the field. He would make one more error later in this game. Just not a great night for him, but flush it and move on. So this would also end up being Mitch White's final appearance as a Brewer, because ahead of Game 4, he was designated for assignment, and Kevin Herget is back now. So the Brewers have an open 40-man spot. Herget's going to kind of fill that low leverage role right now, hopefully eating some innings when the Brewers need it. The Brewers winning this game 6-4 to secure the series win over the Cubs. This was kind of another back and forth one a little bit, even more so than some of the other games in this series. We got what I am for now deeming a Colin Ray special plus, because I think Colin Ray may have exceeded the boundaries of the Colin Ray special, because he has now had more starts exceeding 5 innings than he has starts of exactly 5 innings. I know I tweeted the stat out. I think it was like 9 of 11 so far where he's gone. Or yeah, 7 of 11, 8 of 11. I don't know, something like that. Most of his outings where he's gone more than 5 innings. I'm doing a really bad job remembering numbers. It's been a long 36 hours for me, so you're going to have to bear with me on that. But Colin Ray Special Plus is sort of an extended Colin Ray Special where you get a little bit more length out of him, and that's what the Brewers got today. 5 1/3, 5 hits, 1 earned run, and that only run was on a Cody Bellinger home run, a walk and 5 Ks. This was a classic Colin Ray start because every column in the box score was occupied by a number. So he did a little bit of everything, and I feel like that's always a staple of a Colin Ray start, or an on-brand Colin Ray start at that. The Brewers tying that game up pretty quickly. That home run by Bellinger came in the first inning, and then Gary Sanchez hitting a sac fly to tie it at 1, and then Joey Ortiz giving the Brewers a lead on an RBI double with the assist from Sal Frelick, who on a tight send by Jason Lane at third base made a really, really tremendous slide at the plate. He did not beat the throw, but he was able to beat the tag, and that's really what it's all about when you have a play at the plate that's not a force out. So really nice acrobatic play by him. And he also made another impressive base running play shortly thereafter in this game when he tagged up from first base on a fly ball down the right field line. And that might not get people's attention a whole lot, but he actually did a really good job reading that ball, getting back, and then also just being really aggressive and getting a good jump off of first to take another base there. Blake Perkins also added an RBI single as well to keep things rolling. It seemed like the Brewers were in a good position to win this one handily, but Brian Hudson had really his first off day of the entire season. I know he had been charged with a couple runs already, but both of those were fairly fluky. The first one was that inside the park home run, in quotes, on that misplay by Sal Frelick against Ellie De La Cruz in Cincinnati, and then the other one was came shortly after that. It was basically just a bloop single to kind of knock a guy in from third base, I think it was. So this was really the first outing where we saw Brian Hudson get hit around a little bit. He gave up game-tying home runs in consecutive innings. The first one was to Seiya Suzuki. Second one to Christopher Morel. He came in the 7th inning of this game, so Yoel Payamps relieved Ray and got 3 outs. And then at that point, there was a runner on first. Hudson comes in to perhaps face the lefty Pete Crow Armstrong, and Counsell immediately counters by pinch hitting Seiya Suzuki. Normally, I really wouldn't care about this a whole lot because Hudson's been good against both sides of the plate. I don't think it's a matchup thing for him, really. And also, it's a high leverage situation. Like, you're bringing a good reliever into a high leverage situation. And that was kind of my initial reaction. But then I remembered Trevor McGill's not available. So once Hudson comes into that game and Payamps has already been used, you're kind of like, well, who's left? It ended up being Elvis Peguero who got the save in this one and got the job done on the back end there. But kind of considering that, like looking back, it's like, so if you're using Hudson in that spot, are you assuming that's the highest leverage spot of that game? And if that's the case, I don't think Pete Crow Armstrong coming up in the 7th inning as the tying run is the highest leverage moment of that game. So I thought it was kind of an interesting spot to use Hudson. I really don't care a whole lot about the pinch hit. Like, I know some people will be like, well, Counsell outmanaged Murphy there. Like, yeah, maybe. Like, say a Suzuki's obviously better than Pete Crow Armstrong. I'd probably take the Yoel Payamps Pete Crow Armstrong matchup over Brian Hudson, say a Suzuki, but Brian Hudson's been nails all year. But in the context of now missing McGill, it seemed like that was a weird spot to pick out for this is when I got to bring my fireman in. I don't know what your reaction was to it.
Yeah, it was the same. I think it has less to do with Hudson, who's been, like you said, just absolutely fantastic. He was sporting an ERA that started with 0.5, I believe, coming into this appearance. But it had more to do with Pete Crow Armstrong versus you knew he wasn't going to hit against Hudson when he came in. So you could pretty much bank on it being Patrick Wisdom or Seiya Suzuki there, who are both pretty big power threats. And while you aren't anticipating Brian Hudson having his first outing where he struggled with a little bit of power, I still would rather just have the Piamps match up against PCA. And then if he gets through that next out, you could go Hudson for 2 innings, which it seemed like was pretty much the plan here, to go an inning and 2/3 no matter what for Hudson. So if you could have just let Piamps get through that 7th, which I think there's a pretty good chance you're going to against the 8-9 hitters in their lineup, you might have been able to just get through, like you said, without McGill and use your highest leverage guy at the moment, which is Brian Hudson, to get those last 6 outs. So it was weird that they decided to go that route. Like you said, I don't feel bad about Brian Hudson against Seiya Suzuki in that spot. I still felt pretty confident. Obviously, it didn't work out. Suzuki kind of got to a ball that wasn't, neither of the home runs he gave up were on that bad of pitches. They were honestly both decent pitches that they just went and got. But yeah, it was a weird process overall. I think probably more trust in Elvis Peguero than I have, maybe, is how I would be looking at it. He might still be viewing Peguero in a bit more of a high leverage type of ability and role, but I wouldn't be at the moment. So yeah, it weird, but not like groundbreakingly bad or anything.
No, it wasn't egregious or anything. And I did want to come back to that point. Like, the pitches Hudson gave up the home runs on were not bad pitches. That cutter to Suzuki was down and in. I can't remember. Did he get ahead 0-2 or was it 1-1?
I want to say 1-1.
Okay. Yeah. Because then it makes more sense. I was going to say if it was 0-2, I would not throw a cutter there. But if it was 1-1, I could see it like you're trying to get inside on him and get back into the count. Like, it was a fine pitch then. And then the home run he gave up to Morel was a 3-1 fastball, almost perfectly located on the low and away corner. Like, that's not a bad pitch either. And, you could really be nitpicky if you wanted to and say, well, Morel hammers fastballs and not breaking balls. But, like, you don't want to walk Morel to bring the tying run or the go-ahead run to the plate in that situation. So at that point, you're just trying to get back into the strike zone. And I think a well-placed fastball down and away is a good way to do that. Like, if you locate that pitch well, most of the time guys are probably not swinging at that.
Yep.
In Morel's case, he did, and credit to him for getting it. But I really think this was just an instance of, 2 power bats got to good pitches, and that's the nature of the game. That's going to happen. I don't think we need to read into it a whole lot deeper than that. So Brian Hudson obviously been very, very strong for the Brewers this year. He should have a case for the All-Star game, I'm thinking, at this point, just with how good he's been out of that bullpen. So we'll see what happens on that front. But either way, very, very nice part of that pen so far. Gary Sanchez delivering the dagger in this one in the 8th inning with a 2-run home run off Tyson Miller. If you remember, Tyson Miller briefly made a few appearances for the Brewers last year. He has since seemingly traveled through the rest of Major League Baseball on a series of waiver pickups and DFAs. He's with the Cubs now. He gave up that home run to Gary Sanchez in this game. Gary's just done a really nice job of providing power to this team. That was pretty much exactly what they signed him for, and he's been right on top of it. I believe that was his 7th home run already, and he's only at like 108 at-bats. So
yeah,
hitting for a lot of power early on and a still fairly limited role. So to be able to do that with limited reps has also been impressive as well. But just a really nice job for him. And then Elvis Peguero, like we mentioned, shutting it down in the 9th. That is going to bring us to some of the loose ends for this episode. We didn't really have a lot of questions this week related to the game action. We just had some more general ones. So, Spencer, do you kind of want to run through these since I've been talking about game recaps for about an hour so far?
Absolutely. I can lead into these. So our first question came from Lucas, who asked, how do you think the playing time gets split between Bowers, Sanchez, Hoskins, and Yelich, assuming Yelich still gets some days at DH every week, when Hoskins comes off of the IL? And how would you split the playing time if you were manager? So to add a little context to that, it sounds like Hoskins has been doing a lot of on-field work to try and get back on the field. And Murph even said today that he might be able to return as soon as this weekend. So this will be something the Brewers are going to have to figure out soon. I can kick it off. I guess I would say Bowers has been kind of underperforming where he was a few weeks ago, which isn't shocking because he was doing extremely well at that point. But it's been a bit of a fall off. He hasn't been great lately. I would imagine that they're going to do their best to have Yelich in the lineup every day. So, I mean, building in some off days for back, just for resting the back, I'm sure. But against righties, he's going to be in there. And Bowers is kind of in a similar spot where he's mostly going to face righties. We've seen him face some lefties recently, including the Imanaga start. He did get a start in that one. There's no way I see that happening once Reese is back in the lineup. I think the biggest point I would make is that I do think Bowers probably sacrifices the playing time from where he's at right now more than anyone else. And I don't even think anything that's his fault or necessarily, but I do think Reese is a more reliable bat to have in the lineup. You can always bring Bowers in for defense late if you need it, and he's still going to provide you some power against righties. But Gary Sanchez probably should get a decent amount of DH at bats while he's hitting righties and lefties well so far this year. And I believe Murph even talked about that after the game. Jack, you might be able to add a little bit more on that. But to me, I guess the biggest thing I would say is that I do think Bowers is the main, I don't want to say loser in this, but in terms of playing time, the one who loses the most playing time with Hoskins coming back.
Yeah, Murphy did touch on this a little bit during post game on Thursday. He just said, Gary's really knocking down the door for more playing time, and good for him, because we kind of were thinking, you're going to be here primarily to do damage against lefties, but now he's showing them I can drive the ball against right-handed pitching too. So it wouldn't surprise me to see him get a little bit more at bats in that spot moving forward. But I still like the defensive alignment of a lot of Hoskins at DH and more Bowers at first, because Rhys Hoskins is,
agreed,
just to be frank, a very bad defensive first baseman. He's not good over there. That's not part of his game. And Bowers, even with some of the fielding miscues in the Cubs series notwithstanding, has still been a very good defensive first baseman this year. And I still like the bat a lot. I've been pretty consistent on that, and I'm probably higher on it than a lot of other people are, but I still like the bat a lot. So I'd like to see him continue to get some playing time over there. But you are right. Bowers is probably going to lose a little bit of time once everyone's healthy, because they're not going to DH Reese every day. They do need to use other guys in that spot. Gary Sanchez, obviously, Yelich is going to need some DH at bats as well. So that's going to be a little bit of a mix that they're going to kind of have to work through. And it's never bad to have depth at any position. And they're definitely going to have that now when Hoskins comes back. But you're probably right, Spencer. It's probably going to be some lost DH at bats for Bowers. I do think we're going to see a lot of Hoskins at DH still, but just there's not going to be as much playing time for Jake moving forward a little bit as they kind of find the way to balance this out.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And I do agree. I like Bowers too. I do think the bat is pretty decent, and I definitely would prefer he be the one at first base more often than Hoskins. I think it's going to be a little bit harder for him to be in as often as he has been with Reese out of the lineup. Moving on, we also got a question kind of along the same vein, honestly, from HC Purdy asking, how do you think the outfield rotation works when Garrett Mitchell gets back? Is it time for Churio to go to AAA, even if only for his development? And just to add a little context to that, it sounds like Mitchell took some swings in Boston this past weekend. I'd assume that's continued since they got home. I know Dom Catronio tweeted out that Garrett Mitchell was throwing while wearing his own glove for the first time. I'm assuming that just means that nobody was catching the ball for him, and he was the one catching the ball while playing catch. I don't know if you can elaborate on that, Jack, but that's how I read it.
Yeah, I wasn't out there to see that, so interpret it as best you can.
Okay. It's kind of sounding like a mid-June-ish return might be in sight for him based on that timeline. I would imagine
he's looking at the Angels series right now, which starts on June 17th. So that's kind of the date that they have picked out for him.
Got it. So I guess I'll kick this one to you, Jack. How do you think things are going to work? Because I know we've both been a little probably lower on Mitchell than a lot of Brewer fans have been, but it's not exactly like the guys we've been high on have been performing super well offensively in a guy like Frelick and Churio. So what do you see them doing when Mitchell gets back healthy?
I think he's got to get a chance to take hold of that center field job. It seems like they've liked him as the guy to kind of take the reins there for a while now, and it just hasn't come to fruition with the injuries. I still don't think he's going to hit a whole lot, and now it's probably even dicier now that he's dealing with the hand injury again. Even when you come back from those, you can still come back as a depleted hitter and just not having the kind of power that you usually have or the kind of bat control that you usually have even after you're technically recovered, it takes a little bit of time sometimes to really fully regain the strength. But I think he's probably going to get a decent run out in center field. I just kind of wonder what this means for Sal Frelick as much as anything. I don't want to send Churio down. Like I'm gonna be pretty firm on that unless he has like a 0 for 30 or something
Right.
between now and when Mitchell comes back. But otherwise, I still firmly believe that the best thing for Jackson Churio's development is for him to continue seeing big league pitching as often as possible. And that means he's got to be in the lineup almost every day. And I know it's not ideal if you're kind of putting that ahead of the win now mentality that the Brewers do still have as a team. They're trying to do that as well on top of developing guys. But I really think you need to keep giving him those opportunities just for the sake of his development, and that might mean fewer at bats for Sal Frelick, who's also a left-handed outfielder. I think that's something you have to consider as well when you're talking about this mix. Mitchell bats left-handed, so you're looking at left-handed hitting center fielders, and that could mean less time for Frelick. I don't think Frelick is going to play a whole lot of third with how well Joey Ortiz has done over there, and with how well Bryce Durang has done at second base. So it's not like you're moving Ortiz across the infield. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think there's a case statistically for just plugging him into center. Frelick plays more right, and then Churio goes back down. I am not sure that's the best way to do it. There's also just a very real possibility that this very quickly resolves itself because somebody else gets hurt or there's a setback or this, that, and the other, and that might just be the way it ends up going, and then this all becomes kind of a moot point. But we'll see what happens. It's really those two directions that they could go in my mind, and I'm not quite sure which one it's going to be.
Yeah, I was going to bring up Frelick as the one that I personally think might be better suited to be sent down at that time if Mitchell is showing that he's clearly back to, I mean, at least a decent amount of health where he can swing a bat decently. Because like you said, this is hand and wrist and finger, like all those things can be really hard on a hitter. But I know in this scenario, we're obviously assuming he is healthy. I'm very much in the same boat as you in terms of saying that I don't know that he's going to hit, but the surface results at the major league level so far have been pretty decent, or at least solid enough. And he is a very good defender. I would say beyond Perkins, the best defender out of the group. Maybe Weimer has a case as well, but he's a very good defender. So putting him in center, I have no problem with doing that and giving him that opportunity. Like you said, I just think of two between Churio and Frelick. He's more redundant with Frelick than he is with Churio. So it would make more sense for Frelick to go down and continue to get work and maybe start trying to figure out a way to generate a little bit more juice behind his swings, because I think he needs to do that if he really is going to be the type of hitter we're expecting him to be. So that's the way I would lean as well. On a pretty similar thought process on that one, but let's also go to someone that we might not believe in very much, and that's a question we got from Steve S regarding Owen Miller. He asks / states, Owen Miller is bad. Why are efforts being made to get him at bats? He has received plenty. He is bad. Make them stop. Also, is there really no one in the minors that could fill his role of semi-utility matter? Or he also asks, or how about the trade market? I don't think I would go out. I'll start the first part with, I don't think I would go out and make a trade for somebody to fill Owen Miller's role. I don't think that's needed in any form or fashion. There's really no need for somebody like that. There are people in the minors who could handle this role in the same way. The main thing here is once Rhys Hoskins is back, I think Owen Miller will be back in AAA. But the question along the lines of why are efforts being made to get him at bats, that I'm not 100% sure on. I was texting Jack about this earlier today when he pinch hit in the final game of the Cubs series, and of course ended up grounding into a double play right before Gary Sanchez hit his 2-run homer. But I was saying I would rather see Monasterio or Churio hit there in that spot. I knew Churio was not going to hit. He's been getting pinch hit for in those situations himself, so I wasn't really expecting that. But the fact that I would prefer Monasterio to Miller is not a good sign for Owen Miller, because I don't like Monasterio very much either as a hitter. I mean, when I say I don't like a player, obviously I'm not talking about like they're not bad people. I'm just saying in terms of what they do on the field, neither of them are very exciting. Neither of them are that impactful. And I did not want to see Owen Miller up in that spot. You could almost sense a double play coming that whole time. So I guess my answer is that I don't think you're going to have to worry about it much longer, because I do think he's the one that goes when Reese is back. But when he is up here, I really don't think there's any need to have him hit. I think he should be in that role that we talked about like right away in the beginning of the episode with Ali Dunn and a guy like Vinny Capra. He should be the, in case of emergency, maybe he comes in to play first if you have to move Bowers to the outfield, something like that, without Hoskins on the roster. But there's no need for him to pinch hit in any situation. He's not a good hitter. So yeah, Jack, I don't know if you have different thoughts on Owen at all.
Not really. I'll just say that when your profile as a hitter is you chase a lot of pitches out of the strike zone, almost never walk, and don't hit the ball hard, you're not exactly in a great position to have success. And I think we saw last May, was it, what happens when it looks right for Owen Miller. Like, I think we've seen what the ideal vision is there for the kind of hitter he is and how his approach is supposed to work. I don't ever expect that to work again. I was surprised it worked for that month, to be honest with you.
Yes.
But yeah, he's basically here to fill that replacement role. And like, on the topic of getting him at bats, I think he's only got like 25 at bats. Like, he hasn't hit that much. And this is not his first stint up here either. And I do think it was worth noting that Bowers started against two lefties in this series, and
Oh yeah.
this is just my speculation, but I'm gonna guess that that's partially because they just didn't want to give the at bats to Owen Miller. So I think it's kind of just you're making do with what you have now, and hopefully it doesn't need to last a whole lot longer. As far as finding a better utility guy, these guys are just kind of a dime a dozen, and not
Yep.
to bash on them, but like the guys who are going to be sitting on the bench and they can cover a couple different positions if you need them to. Like, there are better super utility guys out there who are like good enough to get more playing time.
Oh yeah.
But Owen Miller's not one of those guys. He's just he's here, he's depth. That's what his role is right now. I don't think there's any pressing need to replace him or anything. Just kind of need to have an understanding of what he's here for. And yeah, I guess my thing is, I don't know if I quite agree with the assumption that there are like a bunch of efforts being made to get him at bats. You can probably make the case for hitting Monasterio there in that spot on Thursday instead of Miller, but again, it was also kind of like a clean substitution. You put him in at first base as well. I don't know how much that had a role on it, as opposed to you hit Monasterio and then you have to burn Miller off the bench again to put him into play first base, because Monasterio, I don't think they would want to put him at first base. He's worked out there a little bit. But he's never played there as a big leaguer. I don't know if he has any minor league appearances there either. So I don't know if that was part of it as well. But it is what it is. Tolerate it for another series or something, and then Reese is back, and I don't think it really is a point of discussion anymore.
Yeah, agreed. We got a question from Steve Helicopter. He asks, can you talk a little bit about Joey Ortiz? He's been so solid in all areas. What'd you say?
I said gladly. We can talk about Joey Ortiz.
We will talk Joey Ortiz. He says, sorry, no specifics, just looking for background on what we can expect going forward. So, Jack, sounds like you really want to talk about him. So why don't you take the floor on this one?
Yeah, it sounds like he's just asking for general information about Joey Ortiz. So I will start with, he has a great mustache. And I think that moving forward, what we can expect from him is him to continue having a great mustache. End of analysis.
I like it. Yep, that's solid analysis on things that we can definitely expect, especially since he went to the mustache to try and get the bat going, and the bat has been going since then. So I don't think we're going to see the mustache go for a while here.
No. Correlation is absolutely causation in this instance.
Listen, mustache, facial hair, I buy it a little bit. I think some Yankees players don't hit because they have to shave. I'm just saying. But just we'll give you a little bit more background on the actual baseball player quickly here.
I don't know. I think obviously I was pretty thorough there, or not thorough, concise.
Yes, you were concise. I'm going to be a little more thorough.
I relayed as much information as was needed in as few words as possible.
Yes. Thank you, Webster's Dictionary. Ortiz, obviously, I'm sure Steve knows, was acquired in the Burns trade, but the big thing, honestly, for me is that the bat has been as good as it has been so far, because we didn't even talk about this, Jack, but the play he made to end the last game of the Cub Series was not an easy play, ranging to his left, getting his body in a position to make a throw. Like that was, we've seen him do that a lot this year, and he makes it look so easy, but it's not. He's just a very athletic defender. He made a bunch of good plays in the Cub Series, really, but the defense was always the calling card for Ortiz, and his back kind of started coming along later in his minor league career, at least in terms of like adding some juice to his profile. He was not a big home run hitter at all early on, but by 2022, he did end up posting a 19 homer season between AA and AAA, and then he only hit 9 this past season, but he was only playing in 88 games, so he missed a decent chunk of time. But he hit the ball really hard. He had a 113 max exit velo. His average exit velo was well above average. His 90th percentile exit velo well above average. So you could see all these makings of a guy who hits the ball hard, and he just needed to start elevating it a little bit more often. And he's still not doing that a ton for the Brewers, honestly, at least in terms of like barrels and sweet spot launch angle percentage. Like it's not great, but when you hit the ball really hard and he is hitting a decent amount of line drives, his strikeout rate is 15% and his walk rate is 13%. Like you're just seeing all the good parts of his profile from the past, which were he didn't strike out much. He had really good bat to ball skills. And then the bad ones, which were he didn't take a ton of walks in the minors for most of his career, short of honestly like his first couple years in the lower levels. And then also being able to get to a little bit more pop, and it's all coming together, and the defense and the offense. I mean, this is a guy who we talked about Brian Hutton's all-star case. He's got a very real all-star case right now. It's going to have to carry over for some more extended. I mean, he's only had 158 plate appearances, so it's going to have to carry over a little bit more. But right now, he's been probably the best National League third baseman statistically to this point. He's at 1.6 WAR already. I mean, I'm very much here for Joey Ortiz love because he was one of the guys I had pointed out to a couple of people that I would like in a Burns deal. Mayo will always have been my preferred target over anyone else, but Ortiz was like the other headliner I had actually pointed out to a few people, and I've been very happy with the results so far. So I don't even know if that answers Steve's question or if I just waxed poetic about Joey Ortiz for a few minutes, but that's where we're going with it.
It probably served both because maybe that's what he was looking for. So, but yeah, I think going back to some of like the directional batted ball, again, probably doesn't support everything that we've seen so far, but he's hitting the ball harder. I'm a big fan of guys with really good strikeout or walk, like strikeout to walk ratios or walk to strikeout ratios. I just think that gives you a really good foundation as a hitter, and that helps with your floor. So the fact that he now has a really, really strong footing in that area, he's got a 13% walk rate and a 15.5% strikeout rate. Like he's drawing almost 1 walk for every strikeout. So the plate discipline has been really good for him. He probably could still afford to lay off a few more waste pitches than he does, but it's not like he's bad in that area either. But he's done a really good job with his swing decisions on like borderline strikes, which indicates to me that he's seeing the ball really well and has a good feel for the strike zone. I think that indicates that more than some of the bad pitches he's chased, because I think there can be a little bit more going on in those situations. But when it really boils down to it, like on these borderline pitches, the fact that you're seeing the ball well enough to make good swing decisions there, I think that's more encouraging to me than anything else. But even if you're looking at most likely a drop off in some of the results on balls in play, I think you're still talking about a guy who can finish, with a 110 WRC plus. I think that's a pretty conservative guess on my part that I think he can hit, and he can probably finish above that a little bit, honestly, just with some of the skills we're seeing right now. But even if it's a 110 weighted runs created plus and really, really good defense at third base, that's a valuable player. And it becomes even nicer, especially if he's going to move over to shortstop next year.
Yeah.
Because of assuming Willy Adames walks in free agency, which is very high odds, Joey Ortiz is probably the guy who's moving over to short. Turang probably stays at second. And then if you're getting like a 110, 115, so 10 to 15% above league average with the offense, and then the glove getting a chance to shine at a position where defensive value is even more important, then you're really looking at a valuable player. Like you're looking at a guy who could probably be a 5-win player as a shortstop. And that's about as seamless of a transition from Willy Adames as you can ask for. So it's definitely encouraging to see that it looks like the Brewers may have found their guy who's going to be able to hold that position down long term, even after Willie's gone.
Yeah, 100%. All right, we're running real long on time, and it is almost 11. So we're gonna get to this question because we really like this question. From Steven Schlachter, he asked, "The Cubs and Brewers have a real difference in starting pitching perspectives. It seems." He says, "When I was younger, I remember being told that, quote, a reliever is someone who isn't good enough to be a starter. Do you think that this adage is still true? If so or not so, what are the boundary conditions of it?" So, Jack, I know you were excited about this one, so I'll let you take this one first, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually really love this question. This might be one of my favorite ones that we've gotten so far because I think this is a really interesting discussion that we haven't really touched on. I'm going to say that there is a little bit of truth to that, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit and say a reliever is oftentimes someone who isn't good enough to be a really good starter. I think that there are guys who are capable of starting, but they end up in the bullpen because that's where their stuff plays better, but not because they couldn't start. Like if you're choosing between a guy whose stuff out of the rotation maybe plays as like a 4 or 5 versus if he's in the pen and it plays up more and he can use his 2 best pitches, all of a sudden he's a lights out high leverage guy. A lot of teams might put him in that latter role. But that's not because he can't start. It's just because within the context of maybe what the team needs and what his strengths are, he's better in that role to the point that that's what they prefer. And I think that's an important distinguishment to make there, an important distinction to make. So I'm not going to say that it's always because you're not good enough to be a starter. I think honestly, if you boil it down more, a reliever is just someone who's best as a reliever. I don't think that means that they can't start. I think that just means that that's everyone's kind of run through the options and everyone's decided this is where your best fit is right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very similar. I would point to a guy like Josh Hader, who I still think could have started long term if the Brewers have chose to go that direction. But I think he would have been just an okay starter. His velo would have been a lot lower. He wouldn't have been the same dominant type of strikeout pitcher, but I think he could have done fine in that role. But you're choosing between that or a guy who wins reliever of the year multiple times. Like you're going to take the guy who's going to win reliever of the year multiple times and leave that 4 or 5 starter to a Colin Ray of the world that you can sign for cheap in free agency. I would say I think there's people who can't be relievers who are starters in some cases. I think there's people who just, their stuff won't play up much out of the pen. So they're better in a starting role where you kind of go, all right, well, you're fine if they give up 3 runs over 5, but they're also somebody who might give up 3 runs in 1 inning more often. And I could even see a guy like Colin Ray being in that vein sometimes where you don't start super well every game. So maybe you wouldn't be great in shorter outings, but over the course of a long game, you do enough to get by and get the job done. So I think it is just a matter of what you fit best with your profile and what your abilities are. And I don't think it really is the same thing as it may have been in that. It's a good question though. Like I don't think I'd ever heard that quote, but I believe,
it's interesting to me. Sorry if I cut you off. But it's interesting to me because like, if you think about it, like I feel like the ideal is for everyone to become a really good starter.
Right.
Like if any organization could pick that path for a guy, they're always going to pick I want him to become a top line 200 inning a year starting pitcher. Like that's just inherently more valuable always because of the volume and the quality of work you're getting. So like there kind of is a point to it. Like a guy is going to become a reliever because they've determined that's where he fits best, which means they've determined that he doesn't fit best as a starter.
Right.
So, like, I do think there is some truth to it. I would just say maybe, like, you tweak the wording a little bit, like, to the point where it doesn't mean that he can't be a starter, but obviously they've determined that's not the best role for him.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense to me. All right, Jack, it's time for my favorite subject, but we're going to go, I promise you, I'm going to go quick today on this one. It's the minor league sandbox. I have talked prospects on a bunch of different podcasts this week, and I've just mostly got some stats to run through. So we'll go pretty quick. I have one question from HC Purdy. He asks a couple of pitching prospects that I saw some good things from last year were Jesus Rivera, Will Rudy. Just wondering what you have seen from them this year and what your evaluation of them was. So Rivera especially was a guy that I was super high on coming into the year. He's got one of those very flat vertical approach angles on his fastball. It's basically -4 degrees. So it's an outlier pitch, and it had one of the highest whiff rates against any four-seam fastball in baseball or in minor league baseball last year. Unfortunately, this year, he is just not commanding anything, and that was never not the case. He's walked a lot of people, but this year, it's not just out-of-zone control issues. He's also just leaving fastballs down a lot, which makes that flat vertical approach angle much less valuable, and it makes it much more likely that they're able to square up a fastball, and it just hasn't gone super well. I'm not going to give up on Rivero by any means because I think the stuff is really good, but he's going to have to figure out the command. It's not very good at the moment. And then Will Rudy is the exact opposite. His stuff is not very good, but he has really, really good command, and he can pretty much hit his spots whenever he wants. The thing he's got to change is that he does need to tick up in velo or something. It's still 88 to 90, maybe a little bit higher. In the past, there were thoughts that he could get into the mid-90s because he's got a very athletic delivery. He was a two-way in college at one point, so he's working on pitching full-time now. People thought he might be able to add, and it just hasn't really happened yet, and he's not performing very well either. So not guys I would give up on yet by any means, but both who definitely have been really far down this year in terms of how I would grade them out as prospects. All right, we'll move into my pitching performances. I got it. Craig Yoho finally got called up to Biloxi today. Been calling for it for like a month. His final numbers at Wisconsin were a .44 ERA in 20 and a third innings, 37 strikeouts, 6 walks out of 1,134 pitchers in minor league baseball with at least 20 innings. His whiff rate of 45% was 6th overall. His called strike rate of 44% is 2nd overall. His strikeout rate of 48% is 1st overall. He only allowed 1 extra base hit the entire time. It was a double. His ground ball rate of 61% is in the 97th percentile. His whip of .69 is 4th in minor league baseball. ERA is 4th. FIP of .94 is 3rd. The guy absolutely dominated that level. If he does it at Biloxi, I honestly believe that he could pitch in the majors this year. And I would not be completely shocked if he does, because once you perform at AA, it's on the table. You are in the minds of an MLB organization if you're performing at AA, and I wouldn't rule it out. Shane Smith, guy I've talked about a lot, actually. He's been a reliever most of his career in the minors. They've stretched him out. He's been starting. His last 3 games are starts. They started stretching him out at the beginning of the month. His last 6 appearances, he's gone 3 innings, 3 innings, 3 innings, 4 innings, 4 innings, 5 innings for 22 total. He has a 2.86 ERA over that span, a K rate of 33.3%, and a walk rate of 6.8. His FIP is 1.47 in that time. The ERA is a little bit higher because he has a BABIP against of 340, but the fact that he's doing this as a starter is really exciting for me now, because I was already pumped about him doing it as a reliever. It's fastball mid-90s, curveball low 80s, sliders mid-80s. It's very good. Logan Henderson made his first start in full season ball this year. He was coming off an oblique injury, so he's still building up. So 2 2/3 innings, 3 Ks, 1 hit, 1 earned, 2 walks. The fastball velo, which was rumored to be up, was legitimately up. He was 90 to 92 last year. He sat 92 to 95 the other day. He hit 97. His induced vertical break is apparently up quite a bit, from 14 to 16 up to 18 to 20 inches now, which is big time. That helps it play up above the zone, and at the top, much better. His change is still behind maybe only Yoho, and that depends if you're calling that an airbender or screwball or whatever, is probably the best changeup in the system. And the slider appears to have made some real strides too. So very good start for him. On the offensive side, Filippo Dituri, talked about him a lot, just pointing out he hit his first home run of the season. His OPS is now at 1,077 with a 25% walk rate and a 14.3% strikeout rate. He should probably be in Carolina soon. See what we've got against some older and better competition. Cooper Pratt, haven't talked about him in a while, but he hit his first professional homer a couple weeks ago as well. He's got a 129 WRC plus, reasonable 23.8% strikeout rate, and a 15.4% walk rate, that's a very good walk rate, obviously. All of his batted ball stuff looks pretty solid. It's a 38% ground ball rate, 27% line drive rate, and a 31% fly ball rate. So nothing. It's nice to see him elevate the ball quite a bit. He hits a lot of line drives. And his fly balls, he's only hit like 3% pop-ups, I believe. So it's pretty much entirely, when he hits it in the air, it's at a pretty ideal launch angle. And when he's played short, he's looked solid. I don't know that he can stick there long-term for sure, but I do think he's got a chance. And for somebody who's his size, he's 6'4", or 6'3". I don't know what he is. He's 6'2 to 6'4 somewhere. He's a tall shortstop. It would be an impressive job by him to be able to stick there. And then one name I have not talked about at all, Hot Hair Arinamo. He's got a pretty good glove at any infield spot. Somehow Fangraphs grades him out at 30 current defense and 40 future. I don't get it at all. I've watched him a lot. I think he's a very good defender in the infield, so I'm not sure what's going on there. He really limits his swing and miss, not much whiff. He's got very good bat to ball skills. He has 12 doubles and 2 homers. It's only a 100 WRC plus, but he's a young guy playing at high A. The skills are really good. There's a hit tool in there that I think could be really, really good. And like I said, I'm much more bought in on the defense than Fangraphs is. So that'll wrap up the minor league updates here. We've got some injury updates. I guess I'll stick on the minor league side first for that too. Juan Baez was carted off the field. I've talked about him a lot with what appeared to be a shoulder injury. No real update on that yet, but it must have been pretty bad because they had to bring out the cart. Luis Lara, pretty big prospect, went to the IL. No idea what happened on that, but he is on the 7-day IL. Brewer Hicklin, a guy who some people have been clamoring for to get a chance in the outfield over a guy like Joey Weimer or somebody like that. He also hit the 7-day IL for Nashville. And then a reliever I talked about, I believe, last week, that's the only reason I bring it up, is Sam Gardner, and he also hit the IL for Biloxi. So moving to the major league side, we've got some Jacob Junis updates. He is throwing a live bullpen in Arizona on Friday, the day that this will be releasing. And then he would go to a rehab outing next week if that goes well. So after, it's probably not even a live bullpen. Is it maybe is it a rehab assignment in Arizona, or is he going there?
So he left on Wednesday to head down to Arizona, and he's going to throw 2 live hitters down there. So like they'll be taking swings and stuff against them, I believe.
Gotcha.
Just to
rehab
to have some kind of dynamic whatever. Sure. And then if he comes out of that good, that's when the rehab assignment technically starts. He's going to go to Nashville and make a few appearances then.
Gotcha. And then it sounds like it'd be back in a shorter, maybe somewhat bulk relief role when he comes back rather than a starter.
Yeah, role. I think that's the direction they're going with it. I think Murphy kind of touched on this a few weeks ago, actually, about how they were kind of leaning towards, at this point, he can just give us more value as someone who's kind of in a hybrid role. They're also a little bit concerned about just whether that shoulder can hold up under a starter's workload. There was kind of just an indication of, well, maybe this is why the Giants kind of had him working in more of that hybrid role, because they didn't want that shoulder to become too much of an issue. Gotcha. So it sounds like they're going to kind of keep him in more of a 2 to 3 inning type deal moving forward.
Gotcha. Similarly, kind of, JB Bukowskis will be throwing a bullpen on Friday as well. That sounds like more just a normal bullpen, not a live pen, not facing batters, but somebody else who could definitely help the bullpen when he gets back to full health. So sounds like he's making decent progress in that regard. DL Hall, we talked about it last week when we had just seen him leave his last rehab appearance at the time with what appeared to be some frustration and some pain in his knee again. And it turns out that was the case. He caught his cleat on the second to last pitch of his rehab outing and felt a little bit in the knee. So he's getting a second opinion right now. We're kind of waiting on what he hears from that, but we'll see. It'd be, if he does have a setback here, and he said it felt very similar to his original injury in St. Louis, if I'm not incorrect, right, Jack?
Yeah, that's what he said a few days ago. He said it was kind of the same deal, which was what made it frustrating.
Yeah.
He, as of this recording, he should have heard the second opinion already. He told us that he was going to hear sometime on Thursday afternoon. So we'll see if that comes out by the time people are listening to this. But yeah, I think he's just kind of in wait and see mode right now, and then they'll decide on what the next steps are. Initially, he was just kind of thinking maybe it's going to have to be a situation where he has to sit it out for a little bit and try to build up more strength in that knee. But really, it just depends on what they see in there. Once he gets a second opinion, he's already had a round of imaging, so he's got one set of eyes that's looked at it, but he's waiting to see what the second opinion is. I believe Neil Atrache is looking at that for the second opinion.
Gotcha. So we'll have to see on Hall if that is the same type of thing he just had. That's obviously going to be a pretty decent setback because it took him a while to get back to his rehab outings to begin with. So that would be rough. Hopefully we get some good news on that. And then there was some video of Brandon Woodruff throwing on the field. Obviously, that's not really an update. It's just cool to see him throwing a little bit. Absolutely not expecting him to pitch this year. It's pretty much been completely rolled out, but just good to see that he's making some progress, and it'll be fun to kind of follow that progress and see where he ends up at the end of the season and maybe have a better idea of what we might be getting next year from a guy that everyone was very happy to see back. So we can wrap this up with a quick preview of the White Sox series. Jack, you want to take over on this one?
Yes, so the Brewers are going to wrap up their homestand by playing the other team from Illinois. The Chicago White Sox are coming to town. That series starts Friday night. Game 1, we're going to have Tobias Myers starting opposite Eric Fetty. Potential trade target Eric Fetty, maybe. Probably not, because the price will probably be higher than what the Brewers are going to go for. But he's done a nice job for the White Sox so far this year. That game will start at 7:10 as a Friday night game. Saturday, game 2, Robert Gasser will be back on the mound, and once again, he will be paired up with a very exciting young left-handed pitcher. This one will be Garrett Crochet, so that's going to be a 3:10 p.m. start time, and I see you also wrote in the notes $1 hot dog day, so
that's right.
Make sure you come on out, get your money's worth in the form of $1 hot dogs. Game 3 on Sunday will be a 1:10 first pitch. That's going to be Freddie Peralta versus Nick Nastrini. And that will be the end of this homestand for the Brewers, who are then going to go on the road to Philadelphia and Detroit. One final note on this White Sox series. Spencer, I actually see you were the one who wrote this down. Do you want to talk about this for a couple seconds?
Sure. I do want to just kind of point it out that while on the surface the White Sox are a very bad team, it is interesting to me that they are 10-13 in Eric Fetty and Garrett Crochet starts, which obviously the Brewers are seeing both of them, as opposed to 5-29 when anyone else starts. So obviously 10-13 is still not a very good record, but it does appear that the Brewers may have caught the least ideal part of the rotation to see. So it may not be as simple or I guess easy a series as you might be seeing on the surface. They are seeing the two best pitchers the White Sox have, and the White Sox have been closer to a mediocre team with them on the mound than really anybody else. Like 5-29 is a very poor winning percentage, but 10-13 isn't too far off from 500. So just something to keep in mind, because those two are good pitchers, and there may be some struggles with the offense. Hopefully there aren't. The Brewers were able to put up 7 runs on Shota Imanaga, so baseball's weird. We talk about that all the time, but just a little nugget to keep in mind going into this series.
On that same note, anything can happen in a 3-game series, so I'm going to caution against anyone who wants to get too worked up either way about whatever direction this series may take.
Correct.
If it does not go well, oh well. Shrug your shoulders, keep playing. It's 3 games out of 162. The Brewers also just did a really nice job in one of the few series at this stage of the year that actually probably has some implications. Mm-hmm. So like a series like this it's not the same deal as what the Brewers just went through. That's obviously not an excuse or any way to say that they shouldn't be playing with intensity. But just perspective is good. So let's try to keep perspective. That's what we try to. That's what we try to do on this program. I'm not sure how good we are at it, but
yeah, we're okay. Always remember that the A's swept the Brewers last year, and the Brewers still won 92 games and won the division. So
that is a very good point. Yeah, but we'll see how that series ends up going. We'll be back with you at this time next week with all the recaps and just being here to answer any questions that you may have at that time. In the meantime, you can follow each of us on our respective Twitter pages. You can find me at @ByJackStern, and you can find Spencer at SMcKaywis234. You can follow the podcast at BF_pod. And just as a reminder, you can catch us on all kinds of different podcast streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it. You can find us there, or you can listen on brewerfanatic.com. Finally, thank you to everyone who submitted questions this week. Sorry if we did not get to yours. This was, again, a long show for us because I guess we just like to talk baseball a lot. We do try to consider every question that is sent into the podcast accounts. It's just a matter of if we're going to have time to get to them based on some of the topics that we're talking about. But we do appreciate everyone who listens and who sends in questions or engages with the podcast in any way, shape, or form. So just as a final note, thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you at the same time next week.